the War of World War One itself. So in class we discussed a little bit about the causes leading up to it, right? We'll kind of reiterate some of that here and then move into some of the elements of the war. But this whole lecture is actually not really American history based because it's based on what was happening in the war before the United States gets involved. But it's still important to kind of have an understanding of this before moving into discussing America's role in particular. So we mentioned the Balkan region was considered the powder keg of Europe because just like a powder keg, if you light a spark, even a small spark near it, it could lead to this massive explosion. And leading up to World War One, there was actually several smaller wars in the Balkan region, known as the Balkan Wars. This was Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro were going to war against the Ottomans and each other to kind of gain control of some territory. And Austria and the Ottomans are both multi-ethnic empires at this time, meaning they have lots of different ethnic groups within their territory. And they were fearful that these smaller wars would lead to the weakening of their own empires, right? Because other groups might try to rebel as well. And so they have every intention on protecting and preserving their empire. This kind of tension comes to a boiling point on June 28th, 1914, when the Archduke of Austria, Franz Ferdinand, who was actually going to be the heir to the throne, he would have been the future king, was visiting Sarajevo, which was a province which was part of Bosnia, which at the time was controlled by Austria. It's the home to many Serbs and other Slavic people who wanted independence, and so it was a very tense political situation. And a Serbian nationalist actually assassinates the Archduke and his wife, Sofia. When this happens, Austria immediately blames Serbia, the country, even though it wasn't the country necessarily who organized it, but just an individual who acted on his own accord. And in this, excuse me, and in this ultimatum that they're giving to Serbia, Serbia refuses to accept the conditions, which were, demanding a lot from Serbia, and so war begins. But because of the alliance systems that we've discussed, what should have been a small conflict between Austria and Serbia morphs into this major continent-wide battle. So we have war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. Because Germany is allied with Austria-Hungary, they also declare war on Serbia. Russia declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary because they attacked a fellow Slavic nation. And then Germany, at this time, remember, because at the time, the Triple Entente, they're not an alliance. So Russia joins doesn't automatically mean France has to join. But Germany had a real fear that France would become involved, and that would lead them to a two-front war, meaning they'd be fighting with half their military on France's border and half their military on Russia's border. And so they developed what was called the Schlieffen Plan after a general. And the idea was to avoid a two-front war, we essentially have to start one, right? And so to avoid the two-front war, what we would do is quickly and by surprise attack France and then defeat them. And while that's happening, Russia would still be mobilized. They figured that Russia was a little less industrialized and less prepared for fighting, and so that it would take them longer to get ready. And so by the time they were done dealing with France, they could then transition over to Russia. To get to France, Germany and France do have borders with each other, but the main core of France to end the war quickly, the idea was let's take over Paris. And Paris is in northern France. And in northern France, the border then is not between Germany and France isn't there, it's actually Belgium in between. And so the Schlieffen Plan called for Germany to invade through Belgium. That way they can get more quickly to the core of France. However, when this happens, Belgium and Britain have a treaty together, and Britain upholds its end of the bargain. And so once Belgium's invaded, Britain declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. Italy is supposed to be part of this Triple Alliance, supposed to be siding with Germany and Austria-Hungary, but they actually stay out of the conflict, at least at first. Eventually, they take the side of the British, French, and Americans eventually. We also have the Ottomans, who were allied with Germany, and so when all this happens, they decide to declare war on the Triple Entente. So they declare war on Russia, they declare war on Britain and France. Here's a map just showing you kind of this idea of the Schlieffen Plan. Have the Northern Army go through Belgium into northern France, and the Southern Army go right into France on the border there. The Allied forces, which at this time the Allied powers are France, Britain, and Russia, and the Central powers are Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. And at this time, the Allied forces were kind of lined up where they were according to this map, And once these two sides meet, it becomes a trench warfare develops, and we have what is called a stalemate. And so World War I is it's characterized, I should say, by this idea of trench warfare. And so on each of the fronts where the fighting was taking place, each side dug this whole system of tunnels and trenches, which made it very hard for any side to advance because it was so hard to see the enemy and attack them. And the land in between those two sets of trenches, say Germany's trenches and France's trenches, became known as no man's land because when people would try to storm and advance across this no man's land, they were in wide open territory and they were often mowed down or shot down by machine guns and other new technologies that developed at this time. So these are two images here that kind of just show you what the trenches looked like. They were kind of a complex network of these things, and it was narrow, cramped, very unsanitary. Many soldiers died or became sick or lost limbs because of things like gangrene and other infections. So it really was not a pretty or ideal place to be for multiple reasons. All right, this is an image here of no man's land, what it could look like after an intense battle and what looks like also a rainstorm. Complete destruction. Right? You can see in the forefront of the picture here a railroad line that's damaged or gone. A destroyed tank. Right, you can even see explosion must have just happened here in the background. So really a chaotic and unpleasant scene, and it wouldn't be difficult to understand how this could be such a dangerous place to try to get across in order to capture the enemy's trenches. There's two main battles I just want to highlight real quickly because of how ferocious they were. That's the Battle of Verdun, which took almost a whole year, right, from February of 1916 to December of 1916, up in northern France. And there's very high casualties, right? Both sides have over 300,000 casualties, over 100,000 dead or missing, and no real progress is necessarily made, right? Both sides are kind of stuck where they are. The Battle of the Somme is another kind of significant battle. This is even more deadly. This is from July 1916 to November of 1916. And in this battle, you have over almost 500,000 casualties on each side, all over just a territory of about 5 miles, right? The furthest any army advances during this time is 5 miles. So just to kind of give you a little bit of context, from where we are here at Zavarian to the Verrazano Bridge is only about 2 miles, right? So there and back is like 4 miles, right? So really not much. Maybe 5 miles might be to where the target is on Caesar's Bay, right? That's about 5 miles or so. So not much land is being taken over, and many people were killed. And that's known as the Western Front, right? Because it's the western part of Europe, Germany going into France, right? That's Western Europe. But this is a world war, right? There's not just one front happening. There's several different fronts. The plan of Germany to avoid a two-front war by trying to take care of France quickly and early on fails for two reasons. First of all, France puts up a stronger, and Belgium put up a stronger fight than had been anticipated, and so Germany quickly gets mired down in a conflict on the Western Front. In addition, Russia is able to mobilize their troops much more quickly than Germany had anticipated, and so now Russia's ready to fight much sooner, and so a two-front war does occur for Germany. So on the Eastern Front, you have Germany and Austria-Hungary fighting Russia. That's the Eastern Front. The Western Front is predominantly Germany fighting France and Britain. One of the most kind of famous battles of the Eastern Front is the Battle of Tannenberg, which would be in modern-day Eastern Germany. Russia loses, but it prolongs the fighting on the Eastern Front. In 1915, other nations get involved, including Bulgaria. They join the Central Powers, which I mentioned before, are Germany, Austria, and the Ottomans, in the hopes of defeating Serbia and getting some of their territory. Romania, kind of figuring the same thing, joins the other side. They join the Allies, the British, the Russians, and the French, in hopes of getting some territory where this is all said and done. And that same year, which is a setback to the Italians and the Austrians, is Italy agrees to declare war on Austria in exchange for territory after the war. So Italy sides with the Allies in return for land that they believe should be theirs from Austria once the war is over. So there's lots of other things happening. That's just in Europe. This map here just kind of gives you a quick visual of the different alliances here. So you have the Central Powers, the Triple Alliance in here, but Italy joins in with France eventually instead. You have Romania joining in with the Allies. You have Bulgaria with the Central Powers, right? So this is kind of what it looks like at the time. other fronts besides just within Europe are also there's other fronts throughout the world, right? Because this is a world war, not just a European war. And so in the Ottoman Empire, which is partly in Europe but mostly in Asia, we have other battles. And so this map shows you one such battle. That place boxed there in red is called Gallipoli, and it was an important strategic location because it gives you access to the Black Sea, right? So Russia wanted to have a clear cut from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, and so having control of this territory right here would be important for making that happen. And so there's a Battle of Gallipoli, which is a town on the coast here, that occurs in order to gain control of that so ships can travel more easily. Because think, if Russia then had access here, they could send their navy out and attack elsewhere, right? So it was an important access point. So that's one famous battle, the Battle of Gallipoli, which happens in 1915 to 1916. The Ottomans actually end up defeating the Allies in that battle. Japan, though, becomes involved with the war. They take the side of the Allies, and they are able to seize and take control of some German Pacific territories, Pacific, ocean colonies. This is advantageous for the Japanese because they want to be able to expand their own empire, so they're taking advantage of the situation here. When the Ottoman Empire gets involved, a lot of Arab nationalists, people in the Middle East who want to gain independence from the Ottoman Empire, take advantage of the situation. They begin rebelling. There's a famous figure known as Lawrence of Arabia, who was a British figure who was actually sent to go help and organize these Arabs to fight against the Ottomans. Other colonial subjects get involved as well, including the Indians, Australians, and Canadians, all of whom are part of the British Empire at this time. Right, so this is kind of a map visualizing that. The different shaded colors associate, who controls what. So the green there is the Ottoman territory. The lighter shade is independent areas. The purple shade was British-controlled territory, so on and so forth, right? And so in this green shaded territory, lots of different groups want to gain independence so that they could, have an independent nation free from the Ottomans. All right, and just to end this presentation today, I just wanted to show you, to show you the real sense of how international World War I was, right? It wasn't just a European conflict, even though it was predominantly centered in Europe. So this map shows you different groups, right? So the top left is a group of Africans fighting for the Germans in a German colony in West Africa. The bottom is the British in Egypt, right? So again, conflicts happening in Northern Africa. The top right, I think I said that before, I'm sorry. So the top left was the African soldiers with the fighting for the Germans. The top right is a scene of a Navy ship and it's in the Pacific Ocean during World War I. And on the bottom right, you have Indian soldiers on bicycles, and I believe this was at the Battle of Gallipoli. So you have all these different groups of people fighting, making it truly a world war, not just a localized war. In the next lecture, when we pick up, we're going to look at and discuss how America becomes involved and the effects it has on the United States.